back historically at periods of time when people have struggled economically, whether it be for personal reasons or on a national scale, we rarely look to the 1970s for fiscal inspiration, which is surprising because most of the country was actually quite poor and had to be frugal day to day. We may go back to the Second World War or the Great Depression to look for how people made every single penny or every single dollar go as far as possible, not wasting anything, and getting that sense of community that helped everybody survive in the best way possible and thrive through such hard times. We're told in the media, due to the current economic crisis, that our standard of living might actually return to the 1970s. And being a child of the 1970s, I know we didn't have the consumerism, luxury, and choices that we tend to take for granted today. There was the general strikes, there was the blackouts, there was coal fires, there wasn't central heating, there was basic foods, there wasn't the choice of takeaways and foods and supermarkets that we have now. A lot of homes had outside toilets and clothes. We didn't just pop to the shops to buy the throwaway clothes like we do on a weekend to Primark and such. Children had hand-me-downs from their siblings, and people would use jumble sales more often or would share with their neighbours if things ran out. It was very common for your neighbour to pop around and maybe ask for a cup of sugar or a couple of pieces of coal until the coalman came. And that was also a great sense of community in the 1970s that we don't seem to have so much of now. And whether that's because we build a lot of our relationships on social media rather than with our neighbours is a possibility. It may be because we've had enough money and there's been enough supply for us to buy everything we wanted ourselves without having to rely on someone else. But we now know there are going to be shortages. We can see the price rises in the shops. We can see the empty shelves. We know the price of fuel has gone through the roof. We know that the price of electricity and gas and wood and oil, everything that we use on a day-to-day basis has gone up. Wages haven't. Benefits haven't. The Bank of England are telling us that inflation isn't going to come down soon, that interest rates aren't going to come down soon, that we are in for a very rough couple of years. They're using the terminology recession, possibly a little bit optimistic there. Some financial pundits that study markets and historical patterns say it's more likely to be depression. If we are looking at such difficult financial and economic times for the next couple of years, we have to prepare ourselves the best as possible. And looking back into the 1970s, we know people survived and they got by on a lot less than what we have today. And again, from the Second World War and the original Depression, we can survive and thrive through this as long as we are prepared, we are sensible, and we don't waste things. Anyway, enough waffle. Let's look for 10 frugal tips from the 1970s. Number 1. They're saying in the year 2022, there is a good chance we're going to get power cuts this year. In the winter of the 1970s, power cuts weren't unusual, so people had to be prepared. The first thing they looked for was lighting, and of course, it was very often candles. It always pays to have a collection of candles, torches, batteries, solar lamps, LED lamps that work off batteries, anything that you're not relying on the electrical grid to light up. Because if there's a blackout, even more so than heat, the first thing you need to be able to do is see what you're doing. So make sure you have a collection of these items and, of course, near a couple of lighters or boxes of matches, especially if you're going to use candles. And make sure, because candles always attract the little ones, that they're in a safe place and tucked out the way when they're lit. Number 2, heating. If it's winter and there's a blackout, you're going to need heating. But remember, your central heating system won't work without electricity, even if it's a gas central heating system. So you're going to need heat. And if your house relies on your central heating system for heat, You need to make sure during these periods of no electricity that you have plenty of things on hand to keep yourself and your children and your family warm. Wearing layers of clothes, making sure you have lots of blankets around. Looking at secondary heat sources, such as a small portable gas heater, if you're lucky, a multi-fuel burner or wood burner. If the blackouts are planned and we are given times, it's good to be prepared by getting hot water bottles ready. Having hot water in flasks would also be very handy. Having a hot meal in the slow cooker because it'll stay quite warm even without the temperature on for a couple of hours. So most importantly, when it came to blackouts, and it comes to blackouts, is to be prepared. Have everything on hand and know where everything is and have a plan. The third tip is about conserving energy. In the 1970s, my mother had a tri-pan, and this was 3 pans that all fitted together on one ring. So you could actually have to cook 3 individual things on one ring, saving electricity. I mean, nowadays we have steamers that will do that. Metal steel steelers that sort of like 3 layers that you can pop on one ring and basically cook most of the meal in them. They're about £10 to £12, so they aren't expensive. They also are made of steel, so they tend to last a good long time. I think I've got one that's about 10 years old. And they're great for saving energy. So certainly look at maybe finding in your recipe book a few meals that you can sort of like cook in a steamer, or even better, in a slow cooker. And they were certainly around in the 1970s, as were pressure cookers. And these were very economical ways to cook. Tip number 4. In the 70s, we had a coal fire downstairs, an immersion heater upstairs. Now, the immersion heater would heat the water for the house, not the radiators, because we didn't have radiators. Central heating hadn't come to our house at this point, and we had a coal fire downstairs. So what my mum would do, we had a small electric heater with a handle on the back, and she would take this from room to room as we needed it. First thing in the morning, just before we got up for 20 minutes, the electric heater would be on in our bedroom so we could get ready for school in a room that wasn't absolutely freezing. And the same thing, 20 minutes before bed, she'd prop the electric heater on in our bedroom and close the door so we could go to bed in a room that had had the chill taken off it. And that could be reflective of what we could do now, if not just for blackouts, but if we are really struggling financially, is to heat individual rooms rather than the whole house, and heat those individual rooms you're going to be in. So rather than having the central heating on all the time, we could have a portable heater, one of the electric heaters, that's nice and easy to move from room to room. Tip number 5, drying washing. It's very difficult if you're trying to cut back financially or you don't have a tumble dryer to dry your washing in winter. And one thing that we did do in the 1970s was we had areas across the ceiling in the bathroom to dry clothes. And not only did it help when we had a bath that the steam from the water, the hot steam, would create a sort of warm environment to dry the washing in, it also kept the washing out the way if it was dripping, so it could drip into the bath. And as the bathroom was 60-70% tiled, it was easier to wipe off the condensation of the tiles than if you had areas in another room where the damp could go onto the walls and start bringing your wallpaper off and cause the mildew. So maybe a clothes horse or an area, you can get the across the ceiling areas in your bathroom. It would be a good investment to have your washing tucked out the way. There will be the odd windy day in winter when you can get washing dried, and that's the perfect time to get any heavy washing out, like large towels or any bedding. Number 6, if you are struggling financially, you can't afford something unless it's a dire need, you either make do with what you have or you go without. And that's probably happened historically through any period of financial hardship. But if you're frugal, you will tend to do this anyway because it's a perfect way to stay within your budget. It wasn't uncommon in the 1970s to say, "Mum, can I have?" and to hear the word no. It's not Christmas and it's not your birthday, so no. Number 7, we didn't do takeaways, we didn't do restaurants, and the most exciting food in the 1970s, apart from home cooking, we got was fish and chips. maybe once a week, if we were lucky. I can remember my first actual curry was when I was 9. It was a boxed curry, and it was by a company called Vesta. And the meat and the curry sauce was all like a powder with dried lumps in, and you'd add hydration to it, same with the rice. And there's no wonder I never ever wanted to try a curry again till I was 30, because they really were dire. Now, fortunately, I've had a few home cooked curries. I've made a few home cooked curries, and I know what a beautiful, fragrant, and tasty meal it can be. But literally, there wasn't an Indian takeaway where I lived. There wasn't a Chinese takeaway in the 70s. It was just the fish and chip shop. No McDonald's, no Pizza Hut, no Burger King, nothing. Not having all these options to eat out saved a lot of money, and therefore it's something we can actually do now in these economic times, is look at eating out less, buying less takeaways, maybe even recreating your favourite restaurant or takeout food at home for a fraction of the price. Number 8, as children, we didn't have screens to keep us occupied. The TV had 3 channels in the 70s, and a lot of the stuff wasn't aimed at children, of course. And so we found other things to do, whether it was playing out on our bikes or scooters, going to the local park, playing rounders, tig, British bulldog, even a trip to the local library to sit in the children's corner and read books for half an hour was a little bit of a treat. Getting kids away from the screens for a bit will not only really stimulate their creativity, it will also save you a lot of money. Number 9, having things repaired rather than putting them in the bin. In the 70s, we did a lot of repairing, again, due to there wasn't the amount of supplies that we have now. I mean, we have a lot of cheap produce and products in from China. But with China still being in sort of like a semi-state of a lockdown and there being supply issues, the amount of cheap items within the country are going to fall to the wayside, and therefore going to have to look at repairing things that we do have. In the first place, it's always better to buy a little bit better quality, even if you're buying secondhand, because it just makes things so much more repairable or makes things last longer. When I was a child, we had a shoemaker, and very often, maybe once every 6 months, my parents, my grandparents would go to the shoemaker and have a pair of boots or shoes resoled, rehealed, or maybe even segs tapped in, little metal portions that would go into the bottom of the shoes to protect the shoes for a bit longer. And this was not only because shoes were very expensive to buy, but in general, shoes were a lot better made. They were usually leather and finished by hand, so people tended to want to keep the items as long as they could. So they would take their boots and shoes to the cobbler. We had dressmakers that would alter clothes, repair clothes, and men that would come round and offer to sharpen the blades of your hedge cutters or your lawnmower. Haberdashery shops were popular for repairing clothes at home yourself. People always wanted to repair things and look after things rather than having to buy again. And it certainly will help us now by repairing things. If they're beyond repairing, maybe looking at a different way of using them or recycling. So, learning from the 1970s to repair, reuse, or recycle. And number 10, get more creative yourself. Step away from the social media, the computer, the YouTubes, and all the other things on screens for a while and do something creative. Whether it's knit a jumper, paint a picture, do some sewing, do some baking. Not only would being creative and having a hobby take your mind off these worrying times, it will also take you away from the screen where you're informed about all these worrying times, whether it's on the TV news or on social media or whatever. The negative messages are reinforced over and over again. The nice thing is, all these difficult times people have been through historically, they've got through, they've thrived, they've learned lessons. We can and we will get through this. We can learn to love life. unless. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed a little blast back into the 1970s. If you enjoyed this video, please like. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and then you'll be notified as soon as we release our next video. If you have any questions you'd like to ask us, please put it in the comments section. Sending you all happy, healthy, loving thoughts. Until next time, take care. Bye.